Hi again then guys, and welcome to the second car review, of course, from the 1.50 selection in GT Sport, and this time it's a car which I was definitely anticipating. In fact, a number of the forthcoming Vision GTs, in one way or another, are cars that I'm very interested to see. This one, the Lamborghini, the Porsche as well, which we haven't even seen yet. But in terms of this one, my hopes were actually kind of measured, because of course some Vision GTs are very cool and you see them in tons of lobbies, they get plenty of use, and then other ones, they simply don't. This could easily fall into either category depending on how it turns out. Now, how is the car? What does it turn out like? What's the performance like? Is it a good car? Well, yes and no. This is definitely one of the more useful Vision GTs if you are planning to use it, but at the same time, it's not a car without its issues. And in the case of this particular Jaguar, I would say it has two issues, and they are 1, the handling, and 2, the brakes. Now, the brakes I spoke about briefly before, and that is that they simply are not powerful enough. The brakes need to be at least twice as good as they are to give this car the kind of stopping power that it deserves. And it's not that the car doesn't stop at all, it's just that you have to brake so early that it feels kind of ridiculous, almost like that overwhelming acceleration doesn't really mean much, because you're scrubbing off the speed so much earlier that far less powerful cars can still keep up with it with the right driver. Now, in this event, on the Nürburgring, it's one of the official, Vision GT career mode events, there was only one car that I couldn't beat, and that was over 2 laps, and I still couldn't catch it, and that was the Mazda LM55. But, with that being said, that's still not actually that bad, considering that that's the only one on the grid that this car couldn't catch. However, potentially a bigger issue than the brakes is actually the handling. And when I say that the car has bad handling, I mean that in kind of a left of centre sort of way. It's not a bad handling car, it's actually, somewhat strangely, a bad accelerating car, because this car is all-wheel drive as far as I can remember. It's of course fully EV with direct drive, all that kind of fancy stuff that you'd normally expect from a Tesla or a Rimac, and that's all well and good, except the problem is, it feels as if somebody has set up the torque split on this car to be 80% to the front end and only 20% to the back. It really does feel like a front-wheel drive car under heavy throttle, especially when you exit a corner, and that is bad. It's just straight up a bad choice, because it means that you cannot use this car's full potential when exiting a corner, because if you do, you will literally go straight off the track, as you saw me do, in fact, in the start of the footage that I used at Spa for this car in my review of the 1.50 update. Now, in terms of its spec, of course it's impressive. It doesn't have any engine capacity because it's electric. It's very powerful. In fact, it's almost powerful enough to be in the top 10 most powerful cars in the game, but not quite. It's 2 horsepower less than the Tomahawk S, but that's still 1,004 horses, which means that this is one of the most powerful Vision GT cars that we've got. Very strangely though, or at least very curiously, it's not very torquey, and that is highly unusual for an electric vehicle to not be torquey. Usually that's one of the whole points of the system. This car doesn't have that much torque at all. 295 pound-feet is shockingly low. In fact, it almost makes it feel like a Formula car, with huge power, high revs, but not a lot of torque, which is weird for an electric car. And the weight is, as I touched on in that same review, 1,400 kilos, which is actually very healthy. For an electric car to be that light is virtually impossible, let's be honest. At this point, most of them still weigh like 1.8, 1.9, even 2 tons. Even a supercar like the Rimac or the Aspark Owl, for instance, that I talked about on the channel recently, they're still 2-ton cars purely because of the battery pack. Now, of course, this car can have whatever battery pack it wants because it's not real, and I think that's basically what they've done, because it is powerful, but it's far lighter than it arguably should be, about half a ton lighter in fact, and that's great. Of course that's great for the power to weight ratio, it gives it fantastic acceleration, and interestingly, one of the main positive things that I can say about this car is that it actually ended up being faster than I expected it to be. And what I mean by that is, we first saw this car in action at the FIA events, and in that race the car was only hitting 220 miles an hour. Now though, it's faster than that. You can do over 230 even on the Nürburgring straight. So if you take this car on Special Stage Route X, it would probably go even quicker than that. So that was a really nice surprise for me, to be over 10 miles an hour quicker. Unfortunately, it's just the cornering that really kills this thing. Now, if you haven't driven the car yet and maybe you're wondering about buying it, I would say that it's still worth buying if you love the look of it and if you just want to experience something that really does feel nothing like any of the other Vision GTs. I mean, this car is literally the polar opposite of the Nissan. The Nissan is so twitchy and slippery and unresponsive and, you know, random in its steering. This car is the total opposite. You know what it's going to do. It's going to be heavy every time. It's got phenomenal acceleration every time. It's consistent. But, as I said, if you haven't bought the car and you want to know what it feels like, the closest thing to this, I would argue, is actually, and somewhat strangely, the Nismo LM car, the Nissan front-wheel drive prototype, because that car feels almost exactly like this. That car, of course, is front-wheel drive, and you can feel it. As soon as you try to put the power down, it begins wheel spinning, and especially torque steering, which of course makes it very heavy for those who are unfamiliar with the term, just through every corner. It's the kind of car that you cannot put your foot down unless the car is literally pointed exactly where you want it to go, because otherwise you'll just be wasting a ton of time, burning up your tyres. This feels exactly the same. Even though this is all-wheel drive, you literally cannot put your foot down unless you're pointing in a straight line where you want to go. And you can see that from the way I'm driving it. I'm giving it barely any throttle, sometimes none at all. And that's kind of crazy, because usually in an exotic of any kind, concept or otherwise, you can kind of feather the throttle, you can give it maybe half throttle through a longer sweep and corner. You can't do that in this car. The throttle almost feels like a switch. It's just on or off. And that's cumbersome. It actually makes it slightly awkward to use the car effectively, in a similar way to the Chaparral. Because it's thrust driven, it has a similar problem. The car just wants to go straight all the time. Overall though, it's not a bad car. I still prefer this over the Nissan any day of the week. I like it more than the Beamer, I like it more than the Mitsubishi, I like it more than the Subaru, which incidentally, actually that Subaru has a similar problem. But overall, it just feels to me, strangely enough, like it's a car that whoever put it into the game, you know, and whoever decided how it was going to handle, they simply did it wrong. This car should not handle the way it does. The torque vectoring is completely wrong and totally off. If this car was more tail happy, that's exactly how it should be. If anything, make it more like the Nissan, because at least that's easier to work with. You can control the throttle more, have it slide in through corners. The way that it is now, it just feels like you're driving a Jay Leno tank car that happens to have better acceleration. That will disappoint some people. However, it's stunning to look at, sounds fantastic, which is weird to say about an electric car, but you'll know what I mean if you hear it. The performance is incredible in a straight line. Top speed isn't amazing, it's not going to worry a Tomahawk anytime soon, but the acceleration is seamless and phenomenal. You can feel that power. The handling is good until you put your foot down. So technically it's got fine enough handling, it's good even. It's just this car cannot manage its power delivery at all. And I would put that down to the fault of polyphony or the engineers behind it. Overall though, it's a 1 million credit car, so with a Vision GT, you know what you're getting into. If you like the idea, try it out. If you've already tried it, tell me down below, what did you think of the car? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you think it's somewhere in between like I do? Overall though, that's it for this installment. Of course, stick around on the channel for more, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.